There's a parking lot in my mind that never quite empties. It's a Saturday morning, sometime around 1987, and a 16-year-old kid is already at work. He's not behind a computer screen, not half asleep in a bedroom with the curtains drawn. He's wearing a grease-stained apron at the local diner, or he's pushing a lawnmower down a neighbor's sun-baked front yard, or he's bagging groceries at the supermarket, making small talk with Mrs. Henderson who tips him $1 every single week like clockwork. And he's proud of it. That job, that money he earned with his own two hands, meant something. So what happened? Why does it feel like that kid has disappeared from the American landscape? Today we're going back to a time when teenagers and work went together like drive-ins and summer nights, and we're asking an honest question. Do teens still want to work the way they used to? To understand where we are now, you have to go back to where we were. In the 1970s and into the 1980s, teen employment in America was genuinely remarkable. At its peak in 1979, roughly 57% of American teenagers between the ages of 16 and 19 held some kind of job. Let that number sink in for a moment. More than half of all teenagers in this country were out there working, earning wages, learning the unspoken rules of showing up on time and answering to a boss. By the mid-1980s, teenage workers were absolutely woven into the fabric of American commerce in a way that felt completely natural, almost invisible, because it was simply expected, and the jobs were everywhere. The fast food industry was exploding across the American landscape during this era, and those restaurants ran almost entirely on teenage labor. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, they weren't just selling hamburgers, they were running de facto training programs for an entire generation of American workers. You learned to work a register when the line was 10 people deep. You learned to stay calm when the fryer timer was screaming and the manager was on your case and a customer was already complaining before they even reached the counter. These were real lessons. Uncomfortable ones, often. But real. Beyond fast food, there were the grocery stores, the gas stations, the hardware stores, the local movie theaters tearing tickets on Friday nights. There were paper routes before the sun came up, lawn care jobs that stretched all summer long, babysitting gigs that turned into regular weekly income. Teenagers in the 80s didn't need a specialized skill set to enter the workforce. They needed a decent attitude, a pair of working hands, and the willingness to show up. The economy, and frankly the culture, made room for them everywhere. There was also something deeply social about it. Working alongside other teens, learning who you were under a little pressure, figuring out how to handle a difficult customer or a bad shift, those experiences shaped character in ways that weren't always easy to articulate but were absolutely felt. You came home tired in a way that felt earned. You counted your hours before payday. You saved up for something you actually wanted, whether it was a concert ticket, a used car, a new pair of sneakers, and you bought it with money you made yourself. That feeling, that specific pride, was woven through the whole experience of being a teenager in that era. Now let's move the clock forward, and the numbers start telling a very different story. Teen employment began declining in the 1990s and then fell sharply in the 2000s. By the time we hit the years just after the 2008 financial crisis, teen employment had cratered to historic lows. And while the numbers have recovered somewhat in recent years, they have never come close to those late 70s and early 80s peaks. The question is why, and the answer is more complicated and more sympathetic to today's teenagers than a lot of people want to admit. The first thing worth understanding is that the economy itself changed dramatically. Starting in the 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, the jobs that teenagers once filled almost automatically started getting harder to come by. Adult workers, particularly immigrants and older workers supplementing retirement income, began competing for those same entry-level positions. That Friday night cashier spot at the grocery store that once went almost automatically to a 16-year-old? Now it was going to a 40-year-old who needed the work. The pool of available teen jobs didn't just shrink. It got a lot more competitive. Then there's school. This is the part that often gets left out of the conversation when older generations start shaking their heads about young people today. The academic demands placed on American high school students have intensified enormously since the 1980s. In 1985, getting into a decent state university was a fairly manageable proposition. You needed decent grades, maybe a couple of extracurricular activities, and you were largely set. By the 2000s, the college admissions arms race had transformed the high school experience into something almost unrecognizable. Advanced placement courses, SAT prep, club sports that required year-round commitment, community service hours, internships, summer programs, the list of resume-building expectations has grown relentlessly. A teenager trying to navigate all of that while also holding down a part-time job isn't lazy. That teenager is actually extraordinarily busy, Just busy with a very different set of things than their counterparts in 1983 were. It's also worth talking honestly about what that 1980s teen job culture looked like in practice for kids who weren't quite so lucky. Not every teenager's after-school job was a cheerful after-school special. For plenty of kids in that era, particularly those from lower-income families, working wasn't optional. It was economic necessity. They were helping put food on the table, contributing to the household, sometimes sacrificing the very academic opportunities that might have opened doors later. The nostalgia around teen work in the 80s is real and deserved in many ways, but it also has a selective memory problem. The freedom to work a summer job and pocket every dollar for yourself was very much a function of economic privilege. That said, there is something genuine being mourned when people look back at that era and feel a pang of loss. And it isn't simply nostalgia for a simpler time. It's something more specific. It's the loss of a particular kind of early independence, a structured space where teenagers learned to operate in the adult world before they were fully adults. The local diner where a 15-year-old bussed tables on weekends, the hardware store where a kid learned to cut keys and mix paint, the summer job at the town pool, these weren't just income sources. They were places where you figured out who you were going to be. You had a boss who wasn't your parent. You had coworkers who weren't your friends. You had responsibilities that had real consequences if you dropped the ball. That specific combination, that particular school of hard knocks that wasn't really school at all, is harder to find now, and there is a generational dimension worth naming honestly. Today's teenagers are navigating a world saturated with screens and social comparison in a way that simply didn't exist before. The psychological pressures are different, the social landscape is different, and the way young people spend unstructured time has genuinely shifted. Whether that's better or worse is a debate worth having. But it isn't the same, and pretending it is doesn't do anybody any good. There's also a structural piece that doesn't get enough attention. The minimum wage in the 1980s, adjusted for inflation, was actually higher in real terms for much of that decade than it is in many states today. The bargain that work offered, I give you my time and labor, you give me enough money to actually do something meaningful with, was more honest then. A teenager in 1985 working 20 hours a week at minimum wage was earning money that stretched. It bought things. It saved toward things. The incentive structure made more sense. When the wages stagnate and the cost of everything rises, the motivation to take that Saturday shift weakens in ways that are entirely rational. So where does this leave us? The picture is complicated enough that simple answers don't hold up for long. Is it true that some teenagers today don't seek out work the way their parents and grandparents did? Yes, and the reasons range from the genuinely troubling to the entirely reasonable. The academic pressure has intensified. The available jobs have gotten more competitive. The wages, in real terms, have often stagnated. The structure of family life has shifted. And the culture has changed in ways that aren't always easy to quantify but are very easy to feel. At the same time, it would be wrong to write off this generation. Teenage entrepreneurship is arguably more vibrant now than it has ever been. Young people are starting small businesses, building audiences, monetizing skills online, creating genuine economic activity in ways that look nothing like bagging groceries but represent the same underlying impulse. The drive to build something, earn something, create something of value, it's still there. It just doesn't always show up wearing a paper hat and a name tag anymore. What we may actually be mourning, when we look back at those images of teenagers in aprons and uniforms, isn't laziness in today's young people at all. What we're mourning is a world where the path from adolescence to economic independence was shorter, clearer, and more forgiving. A world where you could walk into a hardware store at 16 with no resume and no connections and leave with a job. A world where work was available, work paid decently, and work offered something more than just a wage. It offered a place in the fabric of community life, a role, a reason to show up. That world has changed. And maybe the most honest thing we can say is that before we ask why teenagers have changed, we have to spend some time asking what we changed first.